Hello everyone, bringing you a video today talking about the British lightweight combat uniform in Desert DPM, which was worn obviously in the First Gulf War. This isn't going to be entirely comprehensive, but I'm going to try and cover quite a bit of ground in the video. There is a very interesting forum thread dealing with this uniform and also other items of First Gulf War, Desert DPM, clothing, helmet covers, that sort of thing. And I've put a link to that in a pinned comment down below. If you wish to read about this in more depth, there's a lot of very interesting information on there. But we're going to talk about the basic Desert DPM lightweight combat uniform and then have a look at some variations of it. But we're starting with a fairly standard example of the jacket here. One thing before we get into the details of the jacket itself, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Desert DPM cloth. The history behind this, essentially the British Army had developed a 4-colour Desert DPM based on the temperate DPM in the 1980s. But this was then, clothing made in this cloth was then sold to or produced by other countries in the Middle East, including Iraq. And this, of course, would pose a problem going forward. It was realised that if war broke out in the Gulf, which seemed increasingly likely during the 1980s, there was going to be an issue. So a new pattern of camouflage was introduced, which is the 2-colour Desert DPM we can see here. There is a bit of a misconception regarding the 2-colour Desert DPM, the idea that it was rushed through development for use in the First Gulf War. That's not entirely true. It did pre-exist in the late 1980s. Here we have an example of that. These are a late 1980s contract number pair of British Army lightweights made in the Desert DPM 2-tone cotton rather than polycotton, which of course the green lightweights were made in polycotton. These are made in pure cotton. And the supposition is these were made for sort of military attaches and so forth in the Far East to wear as a form of barrack dress with a jersey heavy wool and so on. And obviously, as you can see from these, the print itself pre-existed. These are a rather faded pair, but it is the same print, the 2-colour Desert DPM. So that's an example of a late 80s manufactured item in this pre-existing 2-tone print. Here you can see the label of the lightweight trousers in Desert DPM, and they're labelled Trousers Men's Lightweight Desert Camouflage DPM. Beneath the Trousers Men's Lightweight on the left you have the NATO stock number, followed by the size, the manufacturer, which is J. Compton Sons and Webb Limited in this instance, and the contract number underneath that. What is true to say is there was a rush on to produce the lightweight combat uniform in this print because not a huge amount of clothing had been made in this 2-tone Desert DPM prior to the Gulf War. So there was a rush on to let contracts and basically to throw this into large-scale production. And that led to quite a few variations, and you would see contracts to various British firms, Spanish firm. We'll have a look at these a little bit later on in the video. But we'll get on to the actual design of the uniform here. It essentially mirrors that of the tropical combat uniform, later patterns of that from the 1980s, which include the dressing pockets on the arm and so forth, which we'll get into when we have a look around the details of this now. You can see a button front here, underneath which we have a zip, a small plastic zip, lightweight plastic zip there. There's a flap which can be folded over behind the zip. We'll look at this in more detail when we turn it inside out, and that's obviously gives some windproofing. The buttons are essentially, on this example at least, are essentially battle dress pattern, going back to the utility battle dress in the Second World War, which used this shape of plastic buttons. Bellows pockets on the front, again mirroring the tropical combat uniform. Epaulets up on the shoulders, as you can see there. You do have a button on the collar, so this can be buttoned right up and the collar can be buttoned round if needed. The label is just inside here. We'll have a look at that in more detail in just a minute. This sort of gold tone label, very indicative of Gulf War, First Gulf War clothing. Down on the cuffs, we have the ability to adjust the cuffs there. So it's a very wide open cuff without that button done up. Just unbutton that there. Very wide open cuff, so easy to roll up, which was commonly done. And then 2 adjustment points so that the cuff can be buttoned and tightened in, just using a simple system there on the cuff there, with a little tab with a buttonhole in it. We'll move this around now and we'll have a look at the right hand side. Looking at the right hand arm here, we can see on the back seam you've got the dressing pocket, and this will take a large or a small joint services dressing quite easily. You see a simple pointed button flap. You see variations in this, you'll see them squared off. This one has a point to it. Nothing really to see at the back here. As you can see, there's no shoulder seam or back seams or anything. The seams are under the arms. We'll move this around now and have a look at the left. Looking at the left arm here, you can see we have a pen pocket on the arm there with room for 5 pens or possibly Chinograph pencils. You see these quite commonly in use during the Gulf with a few biros jammed in there and maybe a Chinograph pencil for working on map sheets. And then underneath you can see the seam coming down here and where it joins the body of the shirt and seam running down the side there. So a fairly simple garment really. Here you can see the inside of the jacket, and as you can see here you've got that flap behind the zip there, so when this is zipped up this can be folded over or folded back depending on whether you want ventilation or not, but it will fold in there behind the zip to give a bit of windproofing. You see the typical gold label down in the towards the hemline here, as you can see in the front, and as you can see it reads Jacket Combat Lightweight Desert DPM, and then underneath that you have the NATO stock code, and then you have the size, metric sizing, and Supercraft Garments Limited is the manufacturer, and then you have the contract number beneath that, SL34B0031. Here we have a typical pair of trousers from this combat uniform, and as you can see again they are based off the tropical combat uniform, the previous jungle tropical combat uniform, obviously in the same colours as temperate DPM essentially, but again based on that design. Small battle dress type buttons on the belt loops and obviously at the waist closure here at the top of the fly there. We have a leg pocket on each side, a bellows leg pocket, as you can see again with a small button and the squared off flap there. There's one on each leg. You have angled pockets on each hip, as you can see there. And looking around the back here, there are no rear pockets on these, but belt loops all the way around, and then you have on these button side adjusters, as you can see there, again with these small battle dress type buttons. We just bring these up here so we can take a look at the ankle. These do have a draw cord in the ankle. We'll have a little bit more of a look at that in detail when we turn them inside out now. Here we can see the front of these turn inside out, and you can see there's a slight bleed through of the print, but you can see the pale colour, the white of the original cloth on the back here essentially, with some bleed through of the darker colour there. You can see the inner lining of the two hip pockets there. We have a draw cord at the waist which runs through a channel, quite a wide channel there, so these can be easily drawn in. A nice feature that I have to say, and something again copied from the later tropical combat uniform, is having this draw cord at the waist, and it's a very effective way of cinching the waist in, quite a comfortable way of doing it rather than using the side adjusters and so forth. And again, if we look at the bottom here, you can see the bottom of the trousers is hand over to give it a channel for the draw cord at the ankles there. So very simple. You see around the back here, you can see the gold label again up in the waist there, and we'll have a look at this in detail now. Here we have the label of the trousers. This may be a little bit difficult to read because it's scrunched up, but we have Trousers Combat Lightweight Desert DPM, and then you have the NATO stock number underneath that, and then we have the size. Again, this is made by Supercraft Garments Limited, and you can see again the contract number is SL34B0031. So I have another jacket here which we're going to look at now, which neatly illustrates some of the variations you'll see, both in details of manufacture and more importantly in the print of the cloth. This is in the so-called sparse Desert DPM. This is a collectorism. There's absolutely no official recognition of this. This is just Desert DPM. There's no official recognition of any difference in it. It's purely a manufacturing variation. We've already mentioned that essentially there was a rush on to produce cloth in this two-tone desert print, and some manufacturers simply deleted colours from the four-colour temperate DPM prints and printed in two, which leaves sort of wider areas of blank space. It's particularly noticeable on the sleeve here. You can see a big wide area of blank print there. So you end up with two colours but big gaps in the actual printing, as you can see again on the sleeve here, big wide gaps between the colours. And this is, as I say, just a manufacturing variation. It varies from company to company depending on what batch of cloth they were using at the time, because obviously cloth wasn't necessarily made by the company themselves. It may have been subcontracted. Someone else is doing the printing for you. You get rolls of cloth, you make clothing from it. So there's quite wide variations. This particular example, looking at the label here, I think this is a Compton Webb. So J. Compton and Son, J. Compton and Sons and Webb Limited. I think the trousers we're going to look at now are as well. Before we move on to looking at the trousers, a couple of other details on this. If we look at the cuffs here, in contrast to the previous example, just presumably as a simplification of the design, the little tab here that adjusts the cuffs in is not pointed, it's just squared off. And similarly, the dressing pocket on the arm here has a squared off flap. As I previously mentioned when we looked at the other jacket which had the pointed flap, this one has a simpler squared off design. So that's a couple of little variations as well in manufacture. Doesn't affect the use of the garment, Doesn't affect the overall design in any way at all, really. It's just a slight manufacturing variation. Other than those details, the jacket itself is essentially exactly the same. The pockets are in the same place and everything like that. The closure works in exactly the same way. One other visual detail I'll just mention here is we have a move away from battle dress type buttons. These are a slightly different shape, the buttons used on this jacket, and they're also in this paler sort of greenish tan, slightly greeny tan colour. Very common to see as well alongside the battle dress type on the lightweight combat clothing of this period. Here we have the label of the sparse Desert DPM jacket, and you can see again labelled Jacket Combat Lightweight Desert DPM, and beneath that we have the NATO stock code, and then we have the size followed by the NATO size in this instance, and then we have the manufacturer, which is J. Compton Sons and Webb Limited, followed by the contract number, which is SL34B0030. So here we have a pair of trousers, again made in the sparse version of the Desert DPM print. Again, made by J. Compton and Sons and Webb Limited. Again, using the pale buttons, the pale sort of tan buttons, full size this time, in contrast to the smaller ones on the previous pair of trousers we've looked at. But otherwise, the design is exactly the same. We would have had, it's been removed, we would have had a draw cord at the waist there. Squared off pocket flaps on each leg pocket, angle pockets here, and we do have a channel for a draw cord at the ankle as well, as you did do in the other design. Again, that's been removed, but it would have had a draw cord in at the ankle as well. So the design itself exactly the same, just this change to cloth and change to the buttons, just a manufacturing variation essentially. You can see the label from these trousers, and again they're labelled Trousers Combat Lightweight Desert DPM, followed by the NATO stock number, and then the sizing, and again Compton & Sons providing the NATO size there as well, and then J. Compton & Sons and Webb Limited, the manufacturer, followed by the contract number, which again is SL34B0030. By way of contrast, we have another example from J. Compton & Sons and Webb Limited. This is exactly the same in terms of detail of manufacture. We have the squared off pocket flap on the arm here, squared off tabs on the cuff. Obviously we have the pale buttons again, but this is made in the more standard Desert DPM print that we're more familiar with. So again, it's just a manufacturing variation within the same company even to see this manufactured obviously in the standard print as opposed to the sparse example we looked at just before. Here we have a very heavily worn and faded pair of the trousers, again from J. Compton & Sons and Webb, and they are again made, the same detail differences in terms of buttons and things, but made in the standard Desert DPM cloth. So again, just to show there are manufacturing variations there within the same company. So you can find J. Compton & Sons and Webb Limited trousers and jackets in both sparse and normal Desert DPM, just depended on what cloth they were using at the time. We'll have a quick look at a couple more variations in the jackets now in terms of manufacturer. This is from Cookson & Clegg Limited. Basically goes back to the first pattern we looked at with the pointed pocket flap on the arm, pointed tabs on the cuff, standard Desert DPM print. And the only minor visual difference from the one we looked at first is the buttons, which are back to sort of an olive green colour as opposed to the light brown on the first jacket we looked at. These are very much as you would find on 1949 pattern battle dress, and also the brace buttons in combat uniform. Does it affect the garments in any way? No, but it'll be what the company had in stock in terms of fitting the specification. So those are the buttons they've used in this instance. And we have again Jacket Combat Lightweight Desert DPM, and then the NATO stock code, and then you have the size, followed by the manufacturer Cookson & Clegg Limited, and we have the contract number underneath that, which is SL34B0029. The final example we're going to have a look at here is from, and I apologise, I'm going to probably butcher the name, is Induico SA, which I believe is a Spanish manufacturer who are contracted to make these. And this shows a sort of in terms of the detail differences, shows a combination, obviously standard Desert DPM print. We're back to the sort of pale brown battle dress type buttons here. We have pointed tabs on the cuff, but the arm pocket is squared off there, the flap on that, as you can see. So again, two slight variations in manufacturing brought together in this manufacturer's product. Here you can see the label from the Induico SA combat jacket, and you can see labeled Jacket Combat Lightweight Desert DPM, followed by the NATO stock number and then the size, and then we also have the NATO sizing, and then you can see the manufacturer there, Induico SA, and then the contract number, which in this instance is SL34B0126. So there we are, that's a look at the Desert DPM lightweight combat clothing. As I say, not exhaustive. To be comprehensive in one video would be a very lengthy process. I don't have the collection to do that, but I thought it would be interesting to show you some of the variations which are brought about by sort of rapid expansion of manufacture of this type of clothing for use in the First Gulf War. So as I always say, I do hope you found that interesting. If you do like my videos and you would like to see more, then please do consider subscribing if you haven't already. And if you're newly subscribing or you've already subscribed, then please make sure you hit the little notification button, the little bell down below, which will of course alert you when I upload future videos. There's also, if you really like my uploads, there's the Patreon page and PayPal where some viewers have very kindly supported the channel. There are links to both of those down below should that interest you. Of course, the Patreon page gives the opportunity, if you're part of the corporal tier on there, you can vote on the mannequin of the month each month. There's also a Facebook and an Instagram page, both linked down below. Photographs of the collection and so forth are posted up on there. And there's also an email address should you wish to make contact with me. It's a good way of doing so. So that's everything for now. So until next time, bye for now.